it's always a pleasure to see Nathan speaking because, I mean, you're such a strong voice in the design system community. Also, like when we're looking at like all the, I mean, I don't know how many words you have written now in your post on Medium.
Many.
It's probably like 17 books right there, maybe.
I'd say 13.6.
Okay, that's very precise, I would say. And how do we actually get to the point where we spoke about this already. We got to this really complex environment sometimes. Again, sometimes actually maybe working on consolidating design systems or working with multi-themed design systems. So how do we actually manage design systems well? How do we do that? Well, I guess that Nathan will tell us how to do just that. So everyone, warm of applause to Nathan Curtis.
Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you're well fed and ready for a solid end run for Smashing Comps Day 2. My name's Nathan Curtis. I'm from Fairfax, Virginia, just outside of Washington, D.C. Little ways away. I've worked on a lot of design systems, and I blog a lot on Medium, and you'll find me on LinkedIn and kind of for now, Twitter or X or whatever, Nathan A. Curtis. What I do for my day job is I consult with design system teams, sometimes as just like office hours like consulting or scope projects. A lot of the stories you'll hear today are informed by as I've embedded as a leader with the teams for periods of time. And so the key thing is like, what is my identity? Who am I? And I'm a design systems architect. Like I'm watching Sam's talk earlier today, and I'm thinking about design tokens and UI components, and we have a workshop tomorrow on it. And yet, I'm in that gap she talked about, like the space between design and code. I write some TypeScript, but I also do a lot of design work. But as it turns out these days, I'm also just managing design system work. I come in and they look to me for experience around practices and workflows and how to get the work done. And so that puts me in this position of, well, on design system teams, they either have one or they don't have one, but I'm also playing this kind of morphed product and project manager role. And so I don't really care what I'm called, but I really care about what I'm responsible for. And that can include things like driving the strategy, ensuring the quality, delivering releases, and managing workflows like you'll see here today. Things like roadmaps and collaborations, stakeholders and developing skills. Those are all things that when I work with teams and my teammates, we're all trying to lift each other. And they ask, how does it work? How does this design system stuff work? And I talked a while ago about how, well, it's just like another product, but it has its own special flavor because of the specificity of the things that we do. And so as we think about how we produce features in a workflow that has a lot of tasks like plan and design, code, and Figma assets, we deliver them across releases, we work on particular initiatives, and we organize them all in a roadmap, hopefully visible to the entire team on boards. And so this is the outline that I want to follow for today. And even if you're not a design systems professional, practitioner, person working on these libraries that we make, I hope that you can still pull out some lessons around clarifying what am I responsible for and not responsible for? What are the boundaries? And as I look to manage the work, is our team doing enough? Enough that's good enough? Do my ideas matter? Am I included at the right time? Is my work visible? And do I have visibility into other teammates' work? Can I align design and engineering better? All these kinds of things about working faster, smarter, and charting a direction for your team to follow. These are all kinds of things that I hope that you pull out. So let's get started. The first thing is talking about what do I mean by features. And in design systems, we produce a lot of things. Things like design tokens, UI components, UX patterns, also things like workflows and strategies and reports and so on. So the stuff I'm talking about today when I say features, I mean the stuff on the left. I mean like the literal things that we release over time. And a lot of design systems teams, ooh, there's kind of a visual. Is that the special like embedded thing? It's not Pac-Man. But I think a lot about the amount of time that we spend on all the different things that we do in the team. And whether we like it or not, a lot of design system teams spend a disproportionate amount of their time working on the features that get released over time. And that's not to say that the other things aren't important, and actually that gray piece of the pie is getting bigger and bigger proportionally over time, but it's still a lot of the work. And so when I say the word feature, I'm talking about something that's made, documented, and released as a system asset. It's often published in, these days, many libraries, but at least something like a design tool and a development tool, and it's offered to not just designers and developers, but the range of people involved in making digital experiences. And so we make these things in a workflow. And the kind of workflow I want to ground, just imagine you're trying to make a component like an alert component. There's lots of different components that we make in design systems, and this is but one of them. And when you first hear about design systems, we talk about the marriage of design and code. And wouldn't it be nice if, as we work on design and code, and there are people like designers and developers assigned to these things by discipline, if it was that easy to make those things. But since I started really focusing on design systems around 9 years ago and trying to create a durable workflow, it became clear that documentation is a separate task. It's a separate thing that goes through a cycle of making, reviewing, sharing, and ultimately delivering and releasing it. And at a team like Discovery, we also separated publish as a task because getting that thing out there for other people to use was a distinct step. And as we continue to evolve at places like Morningstar, we continue to add steps to protect us from doing work we didn't have to do and to understand the work in a step we called discover, where it was like we were scoping and planning and understanding the thing. And then from there, I worked with Target later that year, and they injected other steps, like accessibility in the middle, because there was an external stakeholder that had to review our work, ideally after design and code had started to take shape, because nothing gets released in their environment without that review. But also that there's a UI toolkit step. Suddenly, design isn't just make sure that a design gets approved, but also make the asset that designers reuse. And Giuliano on that team was like, I'm so tired of code evolving and me having to continue to revisit Sketch over and over again. So we injected a tool, what was here called Toolkit, but in this case, these days, is much like a Figma asset that's published. And so when I arrived at RAI, they, as Vitaly said, I write a blog, they'd read the blog, and they were like, we got 10 steps, our 10 steps are super awesome. I was like, that's a lot of steps. You got a lot of steps, it's kind of complicated. But actually, they started to add a few different steps, like separating design, getting the design approved, understanding the shape of the thing, from writing down all the details in what they called production for their designer to create a specification. They also separated testing from development because it was a different assignee that had a different set of things they made that were reviewed and shared and ultimately run, and hardened as another step that a separate developer did. These days, we've settled on what I like to characterize as a design process that yields 3 different steps of planning, designing, and speccing a thing, that then gives way to a production process that involves multiple assignees. The handoff is not just to somebody making code, but on teams of scale like I typically work with, you have a different designer making the Figma asset. You have a different other designer and writer making the design docs. And so this fork to make all these different produced assets hopefully published in sync, is an important sort of model for us to think about. And so this involves assignees. There are different tasks where you can have different kinds of assignees depending on the task. Really, anyone can run a plan thing. It could be a developer going through a code spike, exploring some new architecture. But the important thing for me as a manager is that there's a directly responsible individual. As we track through all those different steps, I know who to go to, who's going to be accountable for getting it done. There are different outputs that you produce at each of those steps. I'm going to publish, I've got a link to the slides at the end, there's lots of words. But there's different outputs that help us distinguish what we're working on. And that can still lead to some confusion around, well, I'm doing a design and a spec and a publishable Figma asset all in a Figma file. There's actually separate Figma files, because most design system teams I work with have a spec file that gets used by the system developers, and that's distinct from the library file, oftentimes, that they publish stuff for designers to reuse. There's separate concerns at times. And so defining done is important. And one of the things about those 4 different production steps is I, as a manager, am monitoring, are all these things ready to publish? Typically, code actually finishes before the Figma asset, which finishes before the design docs. That's generally a rule of thumb, but they can finish at different times. But I'll talk about how we want to make sure they all come together, and I need to know, are we ready? Can this go with that release? And so these things, over the years, have been increasing in cost. We're not making vanilla HTML and CSS templates anymore. We're making React and Angular and all these more sophisticated coded components. And at the same time, Figma, as it gets more and more powerful, means it's more and more intricate. We can integrate more and more things, but that means more time it's going to take. But other things are getting cheaper. Through automation, specifications are taking less and less time. I'd like to think they take 2 seconds. But there are things we can do to really narrow that window. The other thing is design docs, not just writing the docs, but actually sourcing all the inspiration from all the different design systems and using automations like AI to understand, not write all our docs necessarily, but quicken the process. As a manager of the work, I'm also caring about the assignees and who's reviewing their work. It's not just one designer needs one other designer to get their design step reviewed. I'm making sure that from a cross-functional perspective, everybody's involved in planning to a certain extent, that everybody's involved in the specification handoff, particularly all the production assignees that follow. And so I'm paying attention and ensuring that the right people are coming into the process formally at the right times. So let's dig into a few of the different specific steps. I'm not going to linger very long on any of them. But the first one, the plan step, is really to understand what we're trying to do. Let's see, what could we make? Why are we going to make it? And is it going to be worth it relative to all the other opportunities that we have in the design system? And so we're always auditing existing cases around all the other product designers and products that we make. And we're always looking across all the other design systems to look for patterns and get inspired around what can this particular kind of component offer. But sometimes we're exploring design and code. Sometimes we're doing some other research. But ultimately, I want to get to a point where I'm having what becomes a fairly standard, predictable conversation, hopefully in a tool like Asana that's visible, where across 30 or 60 minutes, we're asking questions like, what questions do we need to answer during the design process? What kind of elements might this include in our anatomy? What kind of props might you expect to see at the end of this? None of these are binding. We're not trying to architect the thing in 30 minutes, but we're trying to rough out expectations, and actually using the architecture of the feature is becoming increasingly a conversant and sort of a way in our language that we can quickly come to a mutual understanding of what we need to pursue. Ultimately, we want to get to a point where we're saying yes or no. That plan, or other teams call it the discover or scoping step or the proposal step, whatever that first step is called, I, as a manager, want to make sure we know, are we going to not do this? This is not something we're going to pursue, because if so, I need to communicate to the requesters, I need to tidy up all of our other content in our boards and so on, and then close this task. Or are we going to do it? And as a manager, I need to know who's going to do the rest of the work, what release might it go in, and is that scope firm enough that the designer and anybody else can continue with confidence so that we can get started. So we proceed to the design step. That's where, okay, we're in Figma, we're fully exploring all these different ideas, we're iterating on concepts and getting feedback. And as I think about the arc of the work, from getting started, essentially imagine starting a branch in a file, to making and testing our thing, to the later stages where we start to share the work and formally review the work and then sort of tie it off so that it's done and it can be delivered, there's lots of different things in design that you can do. I'm not going to test you on all these different details, but instead taking away the understanding of, well, when you're working on systems, you actually have to do a lot more of these details across a lot of different cases to make sure that we're meeting the shared need of lots of different people that are going to use it. And you can compare that to the perspective a product designer might take, where they might do some of these things marked in green. They sometimes do the things marked in yellow, and they rarely or may avoid, in other cases, doing the things that are red, because they don't have to solve for all the cases in a way that's robust and durable and is going to live for a few years within the library that we have. But I also think it's fair to give the product designer their props. They're not a bunch of lazy people. They just have different constraints. And actually, frankly, they're usability testing their stuff a lot more than system teams are. A lot of design systems aren't testing the button. They aren't testing the modal. Well, maybe the modal, it's kind of composable. But to test things for usability, they have to be in a context. They have to be in a prototype. And we don't have those. We have a bunch of smaller bits when we're making those. And so balancing those things and finding the right moments for the system team as they work on a smaller part to see if they can fit it in or construct tests so that they can ensure that they're usable is an important thing that I don't think design system teams do as well as they should. As we think about approaching that handoff from design to all those production tasks, we get to this step called specification, or design spec, or simply spec. And that's often documentation, or these days, inspectable assets, where you can see how it's composed, configured, and all the different other attributes that you've incorporated into your design solution. It often looks like this kind of document. And so as you think about that moment, I'm thinking about, okay, this is a handoff. We're going to really get from spec, trigger all these different production tasks. There are going to be assignees across functions. And I want to make sure there's a nice mirrored relationship across all the outputs we produced. On the left-hand side is, I'll call it the design API. It's essentially when we publish that Figma asset, what are product designers going to do to configure this thing? And on the right-hand side, that's actually a screenshot of MUI React props table. Is it the same kind of approach on the dev side, on the code? And as you look through these examples, some of them, like number 1, help text, well, it's called helper text on code. Is that a problem? They'll probably figure it out, but that's not really great, not perfectly aligned. Number 3, size large. Well, if you look at that, it's actually medium, small, and string. That's a lack of alignment. We need to close those gaps that Sam talked about earlier. And so when we're making that spec, I, as a manager, am making sure that I'm facilitating the conversation across all the people architecting this piece together to make sure all those things circled in yellow are a model that we're going to agree on. And to me, that's where the conversation is. It's not in the detailed attributes. You can look those up, but it's in the model. But that model can be derived pretty quickly. And so this is the plugin that I wrote called H-Shape Spec. You just select an item, you press a button, and it derives everything. This is all deterministic, since we're all educated on what deterministic means from earlier today. But things like the anatomy, the properties, the layout and spacing, detected variable styles, even Token Studio. I'm not trying to sell you the spec plugin. What I am trying to do is articulate that the answers are there, and different teams want to derive those answers in particular ways. So how can you in your process model the work strongly enough to facilitate that conversation quickly without people having to sort of guess independently and inspect and search and try and figure out where all the answers are? And so since this spec kind of stuff really takes a couple seconds to run, how can we bring this forward? How can we take a design that is emerging, run something like this, some tool, and actually put it in a FigJam and have lots of people comment on it? And as a result, that's an example of how can I bring developers forward in the process, bring them into the critiques as the right times emerge in a predictable way during the design step. And how can I bring people like developers forward into the scoping when we're having that conversation around anatomy and props? Not that they need to figure out all the accessibility answers and so on. That's for the code step. But still be able to help mold and shape what is to come. And so when we get to that code step, there's a similar arc of work that you could look at all the different things in code. There's a lot of tests, hopefully, like browsers and functional and unit tests and different types of automated and manual accessibility testing. Listen to your stuff in screen readers, please. All those kinds of things that you can do in a code step, but gosh, this is so overwhelming. There's so many things. Actually, if you're doing a code fix, like it should take 5 minutes to make and test the stuff, run the test suite, hopefully if it doesn't take too long, review it. Somebody else looks at a few lines of code that you've adjusted, 3 minutes to write a change log and get it merged into the main branch so that we can publish it. So don't look at necessarily the opportunity of what you could create in your workflow as dictating what you always have to do in your workflow. And so the other thing I like to do is, again, I'm trying to create a way for different team members to see into their work. And so one of the practices at a few clients that we've had is this technical design where they draft the API. A teammate of mine, Kevin Powell, came up with a template where just rough out what's the HTML going to look like. What are the potential props now that you see it emergent in the spec and so on? And what kind of slots are you going to have? What are we going to name these things? And suddenly, the developer, maybe during the spec process, they're filling this out too. This doesn't have to be a waterfall, but they have their own canvas. What way do they want to articulate their idea of how they're going to technically design this so that you can compare and contrast with other people that are contributing the same things? The other thing is, are you bringing in the designers in the same way later in the process? I get surprised by when people ask me to come in and assess their design systems, and they say, what are we doing well or not? And I'm like, well, is the designer able to review stuff after they hand off the design? They say, why would they do that? Instead, is there a requirement for the designer to be a required reviewer of the code step? And to me, that's table stakes for a process like this. As we go into Figma Asset, recall that I distinguish getting the design right and approved from making the publishable, robust Figma assets that all the product designers are going to use. And oh my goodness, there are all these things that you can do with Figma assets these days. One of them is you plan Figma assets, just make the thing. Isn't the thing already made? And whether it happens during the design step or in this formal later step where we're creating the publishable asset, we create Figma assets that mimic the now just like yesterday changed UI 3 UI in Figma, but mimic the Figma UI so you don't have to build the asset to create what the designers will experience with the asset, such that what's it going to look like when they interact with that. And I want to get not just other designers on the team to look at this, but I want developers to look at this too so they can start to ask questions like, well, at what level are we exposing this particular property? How aligned is this with where code is going to go? And to craft these, it took like 5 minutes just to take some Figma artwork pieces and depict what the user's experience, the designer experience, is going to be. Also, testing Figma assets. These things are so complicated, and people talk about, well, give us the checklist, and then we give them the checklist, and they're like, oh my gosh, that checklist is too long, I never want to use that checklist. There are so many things that you could check about anatomy and color and text and variables and content and resizing. And the point is to avoid things because designers using your Figma assets have high expectations and they're getting higher. Do you want to have a collision of a content with the X in the upper right-hand side, or do you want to have the wrong icon when they swap between success and error variants? Or is there stuff that's missing as they toggle properties? If you're not testing these things, they're going to have a bad designer experience. This also suggests, too, that as you think about the specification step and the Figma step, if you can automate the specification, how much should these things actually be in the same step? And for one team, it's the same step. They use automation tools, and they really try to go back and forth. But I do want to caution them to say, in one case with the spec, you're communicating to developers. You might need to include more props if you're trying to automate these things. You might need to include a different architecture to communicate through the automation what the developers need to know than what the designers need to see in their day-to-day work. And so that distinction becomes more fine-grained or refined, I guess, as these tools get more powerful. So there's all these steps here represented as columns. There's all these potential tasks here represented as checkboxes in each of these rows. And so that's a lot of work. You're telling me to make a good design system, you have to do all this stuff. And the answer is no. You don't have to do all this stuff. There could be a model for you to be able to think about your own process and decide, here are the things we do, here are the things we don't do and we're not going to do anytime soon, narrowing it down to what are the yellow things that we can consider doing better, and how can we grow our practice and grow our tools and other kinds of things that we do to make our system work well. Ultimately, we're trying to deliver systems across a set of releases. We're trying to be predictable. We're trying to make sure we're working on particular things now, we know what we're going to work on next, and we know what we might be working on later. And so when I talk about releases, this is talking to the right crowd here, but publishing design and or code libraries, typically both, where you have the assets you're publishing plus the docs, so you have design assets, design docs, code assets, code docs, how integrated are your documentation sites. That will invoke whether or not you need different steps, but also how you're communicating those changes to the people that use them. So the model in my head is, on the far right, I've got all the tasks that we need to do to deliver a card. And in that middle column, I know that we're working on 5 different features that are going to go in our August 2024 release. And then in our September release, we have 3 more. Maybe we're working on plan and design steps for those, whereas in the August release, we're already working on code and Figma assets and documentation. And I'm thinking typically if it's a monthly release cadence, because teams are different, I'm generally thinking about having the next 2 releases being pretty locked down. And then the next release or 2 after that, sort of sensitized, we understand generally what's going to happen. And so different teams present this in different ways. We're past the days like here with Target. They had a Nicolette design system where they had their tasks as columns and their features as rows as they were making their emergent first major release of their design system. We're done with putting this in the hallway on a board right next to where people go to the elevator so that you can spark conversations. But I love this because it's in a prominent place that people can see. So where is your status table, as it were? Where is your revelation of the progression towards a major thing that you're making? And how can you bend your tools here, Asana, to actually add specific columns that even if they're manual for me to do once a week in a planning session, I can still see my tasks as columns, organizing my features as rows in sections that correspond to releases. And so you start to see this clarity, and we can meet on a regular basis to talk through where each of these different features are at in the cycle. Ultimately, we get to the release day. And so as we get to that release day, we're going to want to communicate in places like Slack Maybe you have a design channel and a development channel. Maybe you have an email with a subscriber list of 100 or 200 or 300 people. But I need to think backwards, weeks in advance, to how are we going to create the imagery and the content? How are we going to draft it? And how are we going to just scope and talk about what the message is that we want to portray? And so as you think about that communication cycle, it's actually part of a larger orchestration of getting all the library content in the Figma file correct, getting the documentation site content like version histories and the homepage or a blog, and getting that actual release announcement all orchestrated before and after the actual go-live publish moment when the code goes onto the code registries and you click publish in the Figma file and so on. And so this overall, it's 54 tasks in a big task that we copy every single time we do a release. It has prescribed initial assignees that we sometimes change based on who's available or who's working on what. But it actually, for a team, for this particular team, they had around 8 to 10 designers. They had 15 to 20 developers. It became incredibly routine. Everybody knew when we needed to start each of the pieces. And so I loved the predictability of it all. And so the predictability of features is really helpful, but what about when you need to pursue initiatives, all those things that aren't the next component or the next token? So when I use the term initiative, other people use epic or mission or what have you. It's scope and related tasks to drive towards an outcome and produce particular outputs to solve a problem, often within a defined period of time. So an example of a mission or initiative one of my teams was pursuing recently is modality. Think modals, bottom sheets, partial and full takeovers, how things layer with elevation, and really their system didn't have any of that. And so how do you pursue that, let's say over a 3 to 6 month timeline to get all of those things done? And as a design system manager, I'm thinking about all the different types of initiatives. Sure, feature development, the black one amid all these sort of light gray cards, we're always doing various scales of feature development. But I'm trying to balance it against things like a composability initiative to work on modals and cards, or designer onboarding to create better training, and thinking about the problems, the outcomes, the risks, the opportunities, and all the different things that would go along with pursuing that. When we think at that level in design systems, we want to get feedback. How do you succinctly describe each of those things with simply a good title, a thumbnail, a basic description, maybe some of those properties, and then reach out to many stakeholders to get their sense around what's important? Here, this is sort of an extraction from a process I went through with Jules Forrest. She's from Credit Karma. And if you're interested in road mapping design systems, but I would say engaging stakeholders to get good quantitative feedback and helping them see the forest of all the opportunities and understand where you're going. This is a great talk that she gave about 2 years ago at Figma's Schema conference. Ultimately, that helps us understand where we're going on a roadmap. If we've chosen at a particular time to tune around 40 to 50% of our investment in features, but also pursue improving our web and native parity, a whole new section of charts, which frankly would take 6 to 18 months to make a really good charting data visualization subsystem, maybe improving composability. That might be all the quote-unquote work that's active that we're working on. And so people are going to ask, what's the status of our big bets, particularly the people above me in the organization? And so yeah, I have a board for that. It's called the Roadmap Board. It's got things like modality that are active initiatives. I have a whole list of other initiatives that aren't active, but a modality initiative is going to be made of some discovery and learning tasks and research that then will give way to all the features that we need to deliver over time. This is probably the least looked at board. It's the top, highest level thing, but still it reveals that there is this hierarchy and broad collection of work that the team is pursuing over a given period of time, such that if we've got modality and we're going to deliver most of the components for that, like partial takeovers and a new version of our modal and so on, that might take us 4 releases to really get all of that out, hopefully in this example, by the end of the year, as we're working on lots of concurrent different things at once. And so ultimately, hopefully you're getting a glimpse of lots of boards that I have in the team, in the way that I run teams, either in Asana and the ones you're seeing here, or Jira is another product that I make those on. But as I go in, I want to make sure there are boards that are answering particular questions that we can huddle around to talk at a very low level or a very high level about our design and dev tasks or our roadmaps and our releases, such that that helps me understand, okay, what are the ceremonies that we have? Where are my dev leads and design leads? Who remaining across the design and dev teams need to be involved in each of these conversations? And how can we orient around the kinds of boards like I have here for dev, react, design, or releases to continue managing the work over time? One of my favorite things is the to be prioritized bucket. I just put the first section or the first column of whatever board. Where can we put a thing that we all need to talk about? And I know the kind of collection of people that need to talk about it. Where can we just drop those such that we empty that out every time we have that ceremony? We can't finish the ceremony oftentimes until our can't finish stand-up or planning or what have you until we've emptied out that hopefully fairly shallow bucket. The last thing I'll talk about is intake. So as we serve a design system community of designers, developers, and others, they're going to ask for stuff. And intake for dev and design oftentimes is different sort of intake channels. But ultimately, they kind of ask for the same kind of stuff. They want to request a feature, they want to get a defect fix, they want to propose a contribution, or they just have some support request because they need help with something. And so it's up to us to model how do we route all those different requests into the dev or design boards oftentimes. Maybe as a trafficker like myself, I see something and I immediately know, let's just make that ready to start. We're going to start that today or tomorrow. Whereas other things are going to funnel into the board that really unifies design and dev, like our release, in this particular example, the releases board, such that we want to have a conversation across functions to prioritize, is this a feature that we want to work on? And if so, should we actually immediately put it into one of our imminent releases, or should we put it in the backlog, or should we just respond to the person and put it in the trash because this is not going to be relevant for us to maintain over time. So hopefully that kind of tour has given you some inspirations on the kinds of things I'm thinking about, from very low-level subtasking to very high-level pursuit of initiatives across a roadmap. And I hope that you walk away with some takeaways. So thank you very much. So I've got 3 more dad joke design systems things. No, I don't have any of those. None of those?
I mean, we have one more for sure, but I think given the previous experience we had.
Yeah, I thought
I'm not
Tooltip
sure.
was going to land.
That's okay. Well, maybe next time. Maybe next time. Quite incredible to see how far we've come, I have to say. Because I mean, if I look at the initial ways of how we were, just putting components together, style guides back in the day, and now looking at all of it is interconnected somehow. We have the tokens, we have the whole processes around design systems. And I think one of the sentiments that kind of came out from this is, when do we know that we are not over-engineering this stuff, right? And I mean, of course, if you're working like an enterprise environment or corporate environment in general, you probably need a particular level of orchestration, right? But the question, I guess, that came up, when do you need this level of orchestration?
I think there's a sense of maturity of not just design systems as a practice in our field, but also design systems within an org relative to the scale you're trying to solve the problem. So if I'm coaching a team that has one designer working on the system, collaborating with one developer that's kind of making a library, and there's only 2 or 3 other designers, do I need that dev and design intake flow of any of that stuff? Absolutely not. That is way over-engineered. But if I'm working with a company like Verizon, for example, that have hundreds of designers and thousands of developers, we need a very well-defined intake tool to make sure that the dev intake questions get answered immediately, because there's hundreds of people we're trying to support on a week-to-week basis.
Whenever we get so many people on board.
So it's a question of scale, and Verizon, some of these examples were from Verizon. You don't get there in a day. That design system is actually celebrating today its 5th anniversary. So it took time to get to that level of sophistication.
I absolutely love this idea of the public board where you kind of track where you are right now. I think very often we get so stuck almost in the digital tools, and then we have a place somewhere where this is all presented nicely and beautifully and all of that. But then it would be nice to walk in a room and say, okay, this is where we are at. Right, so I find that this is a relatively simple thing to do. I also was working with a company in Germany, and they were basically not even doing just this little board, but they actually cut out the components, but in a very abstract form. And so whenever there was a prototyping or something, designers, developers would get together next to a whiteboard, like an empty board, and they would just pull those things together. Oh, should this go here? And be like, should we filters here, filters there? And sure, if you adjust the design, that would be different, but it was very abstract. And so I think this is a very powerful idea per se.
Yeah.
That's great. There is a question from a question mark. That's, says so here. Our team has gone through 3 different design systems over the last 6 years, and despite our efforts to work on governance and accountability, it just doesn't seem like it's working. What would you recommend? Anybody feels like this, maybe? No? What would you recommend in this situation? We're close to giving up on the idea altogether.
So that's not enough to answer
Sure.
a question with any sort of clarity, but I would be really curious around the organizational dynamics and value that they're getting out of the system relative to their expectations. And so sometimes I hear stories of, well, we don't have 100% adoption. Well, nobody, like I've ever worked with, has 100% adoption. You're like creating the wrong sense of how far you want to get, how fast you want to get there, that makes people feel like it's a failure. And so a couple things that I think about are, do you have people that are assigned to do well-defined work? Because if you say, let's go federated, we can just build our library by everybody contributing, I'm like, that's tantamount to starting a GitHub repo and just saying, have at it, make some code, people. Like, you need some architecture, and you need to have curators, and you need to be maintaining things to have it at a certain level of quality. The other thing is, I would be looking at the relationship of design and dev, and how much do they talk, and how much organizationally are they managing resources that are working together. I actually don't care who pays for the design system. I care that it's being made together,
right.
And if that space is being well formed enough.
But how do you know that you are on the right track? Like, let's say, how do you know, like, okay, you're not at 100% adoption, you're not at 50% adoption, so you're like, I don't know, 62%. Like, what is I guess the question is it worth kind of really aiming for that, I don't know, 80%, 85%, and say, okay, we're there, that's great. Or how do you know when you're fine? Because I mean, it could be that different teams have maybe different needs, and then you can never get 100% adoption because there's always something new campaigns, new whatever, right? So do you need to go to 100% or try to? Or is it like, how do you know when to stop?
I really appreciate when I come in and a director that is sponsoring the work of me as a consultant reminds me, what's the impact? What's the impact? What's the impact? And so when they continue to remind me of that, I think about an ecosystem of, let's say, 50 adopters, and I'm thinking to myself, where's the business value? Like, where are we going to be able to make a difference such that 20 of these other adopters, I'd love for them to use the system, but I don't care. My success may not be impacted at all by them being successful. The other thing is that as systems mature, you're going to reach some sort of ceiling with the number of components that you need in your core catalog. And you're going to shift from this product mentality of just delivering all these components and tokens like I'm talking about into service mentality and platform management mentality. And from that perspective, it's less about delivering the next feature or getting the next adopter, but it's about managing teams through periods of change, through a redesign, through a refactor, through, as we learned about something and it evolved, helping them integrate it into their environment.
That's right, that's right. Also, kind of building on top of that, there's a question from Murad here. As design systems teams, we often focus on delivery and neglect discovery. How can we get closer to our first-hand end users and understand them better? On which stages do we need to ask for their input?
I think that, as you saw in what I was calling the plan step, sometimes called discover or discovery step, that's a step where designers need a lot of space and also need a lot of autonomy to create the kinds of ways they're going to approach that discovery process, but it's got to include things like audits, but it also has to include lots of conversations with their teammates, the other product designers and other different types of domains that might use a feature like that. And so from that perspective, it's not just about duration of the task, it's about exposure and how much listening and collaboration they can do to understand what the shared need is and define the shared need really well. Sometimes that discovery step might take as long as delivering a significant enhancement with all the rest of the steps combined.
That's right. Question from Will. Building a design system of atomic elements is a challenge enough? How do we best handle building domain-driven libraries of reusable higher-order components with app building teams? We find that components reuse is a struggle the closer we get to the app domain.
I think that tends towards a question around configuration and composability, because as you have larger components like a modal or a card that you still might have in your core catalog, or things like carousels. How much, what I see a lot of system teams doing these days is straying away from trying to develop the super component, the modal that has all the props and all the features in one configurable way, but instead, what are the smaller parts so that I can put my modal or my card together in custom ways that are still fairly consistent and still, with those smaller parts, solve 80 to 90% of the effort I need to do, such that my effort is 10%. That gives a lot of autonomy and independence that product designers and developers want, but it also gives you lots of named parts also to monitor how they're being put together so that if you need a product tile or event tile or something more specific and configurable, you can also create that too if it's going to meet a shared need.
Well, I think for the last question, maybe last two questions, a question from Olivia, got 6 pluses in the Google Doc. Oh, okay. So how would you recommend handling implementing a design system from the very start? I'm the first developer at my job who has wanted to implement one, which puts me in a unique position of wrangling all the teams to be on the same page. How can I communicate with the others to make sure that they're actually on board? I'm feeling like I'm at the breach between all the teams as a front-end developer, and I don't even know where to begin, and it feels like I have to wear all the hats.
I would think about, that's a tough challenge, because if you start making foundational things, they're going to need to trust that you're making them at a sufficient level of quality. So one of the things I like to say is start design systems instead by designing and building systematically. How can you take some of the principles of building encapsulated components, having a place where they can be easily imported from and reused, that they're versioned, and you can manage things like not breaking them often, or when you do break them, you can communicate clearly that they have been broken and how to change or upgrade from them. Start thinking about those different practices around component-driven development, and start to incorporate that into the architecture that you have. You also don't need to build an entire catalog to create value. I went into one client, and I thought, wow, in 6 months, we're going to have a catalog of 50 things, and it's going to be so full and awesome. And we did fonts, color, icons, forms, and a button. And the VP at the end was like, you made so much progress. And so think about how you can start working on the most important parts and validating that they're the most important parts that are going to have an impact on the org, rather than thinking you need to make a whole catalog of interconnected things with this beautiful token taxonomy.
Yeah, kind of tapping right into where you actually will be making the most impact, where you actually realize and know that there is a pain point, right?
Yeah.
And maybe the final one also got a lot of pluses here from Andrew. How do you drive design system adoption in a long-standing project where product teams are focused on feature releases?
It's a tough thing, particularly if there's not a galvanizing external force like a rebrand or a technical framework refactor or new North Star architecture. If there's no thing that's making them make major change, then it's more about how you are positioning the adoption to and developing relationships with the products that matter most and that have the most opportunity to use the system. For example, a new product that has not much of a front-end architecture and is creating a lot of emergent stuff, hopefully is using the system to succeed. An existing product nearing maintenance mode that has a massive amount of UI that they're not changing, maybe that's not an opportunity. And so how do you think about positioning into the right products to get the adoption going, and then also position the system not as another thing, another bar to add to their Gantt chart, but instead to be something that enables their existing bars to go faster or deliver at higher quality or deliver more consistently.
So Nathan, imagine a world in which we maybe would have all these insights in one book. Can you imagine this world?
I can.
Is there something in the works maybe by any chance?
Not formally yet. What are you talking about this on the stage for?
I mean, I'm just curious. I'm just saying it might be a good idea to bring it all in one book. That's all I'm saying.
I would love to write many books.
That sounds like good to me. Well, I hope that this book will eventually make its appearance. Well, thank you so much, Nathan, for being with us.
Thank you so much. Thank you.